Hey gang, and if you've been hanging around the channel for any length of time, especially since the debut of the Transformers Siege line, then you know that I have been kind of covering that line, giving not only my usual grades, but also answering the question of whether or not the price increase that we've seen recently is justified by giving them a verdict of guilty or innocent. Well, that verdict is about to take on a whole new perspective and twist when we look at this guy. That's right, it is Q's judge in the latest GotBot True review. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm so happy that you're here again. I am your host, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, please like, comment, share, of course subscribe, and while you're at it, that's right, hit the bell for the notifications, please. And thank you. Check out Machinery of Man, the Everything Factor, Transformers Collectors, NL, and have a look for me everywhere. And this is my version now of a Quintesson, a character that is prominent, especially to G1 fans, and I guess Alpha Q in his own right, but like a character, a set of characters, a race, I suppose, that has really been underrepresented. I mean, officially, all we've ever really gotten is Alpha Q, and I suppose the little figurine of Quintesson during the run of the last night. Never have we really gotten the, five-faced mongrels that we all know and love. Well, unofficially, we had an entry a few years ago by Impossible Toys, and those are fine figures. They're good enough, they're pretty great, though I have heard complaints about the plastic being very thin. And I have heard that the tentacles just tend to lay limp. Though, to be fair, they did do the judges, and they've done the prosecutors, and they've done a lot of different types. And as we'll discuss briefly, there are different types of Quintessons. Nevertheless, I think when most people think of a Quintesson, they think of this five-faced dude. And I'm so glad to finally have found these little guys. They're maybe smaller than they should be. I guess it depends on your sense of scale. And maybe it's okay that they're smaller. I'll explain why that is. And how fantastic this guy is, even though he doesn't technically transform, when we head over to the table and take a closer look at him. And here's my iteration of those fiendish five-faced freaks known as the Quintessons. And while a lot of people are very familiar with the larger release that came out from Impossible Toys many years ago, not quite as many people know that this offering also exists. We're going to begin by taking a quick look at the packaging. And I actually kind of like this packaging. There's a lot of, I don't know, cyberglyphics, I suppose. A message maybe from Quintus Prime, the creator of the Quintessons, if you follow the Covenant of Primus anyway. The Quintessons were introduced as the creators of the Transformers, but a lot of things have been retconned over the years that kind of paints them more as unscrupulous businessmen, guys who don't do business on the up and up. They're kind of scandalous and sleazy, if you will. They're not above doing whatever it takes for their own greed and self-interest. And of course, because they're weak and really can't defend themselves, they rely a lot on the Alicons and, more importantly, the Sharkticons, especially during their mock trials. Now, we've seen 5 sides of this, and they're pretty much the same. It looks nice, but it's still basically just a box. What about the 6th side? Well, the 6th side is actually worth discussing a little bit. That 6th side identifies this as the super robot creation Legend Heroes-01 Q's judge, because it's a Quintesson judge. There's a lot of different types of Quintessons. We'll talk about that briefly in just a little bit. But you will notice that we have kind of a layout of how the faces can go attached. One says in TV, one says like in movie. I think actually, based on my extensive image research, I looked up a bunch of pictures. I would say that this should be reversed. What is listed here as the layout for the movie, I think, is more akin to the layout on TV. And what's listed here as the layout for TV is more like it was in the movie. When we open up that packaging, we have this inside. It's a clamshell, 5 faces on one side, and the body and the little light beam thing that they travel on in the other side. I figure we might as well start building a Quintesson from the ground up. This is the absolute resting base at the very bottom of his light beam. There is a hole in the top where you can place the, the longer part of the light beam. And by the longer part of the light beam, I mean this. There is a, I'm going to say 5mm peg on the bottom, a 5mm peg on the top. The bottom one will go into the base. The top one will go into the body of the Quintesson. So far we have this. Probably exactly what you expected. Now what about that body? Out of package, the Quintesson body looks like this. It's basically all painted in this gray silver motif with a little bit of yellow detailing at the bottom. I think that's also molded in and painted. And of course we have the tentacles hanging away. On the very bottom of the body, you can see that there's an opening. That is where the light beam will go attached to this guy. But in essence, this is actually 2 separate pieces. This is inside the top, and this is like dense, robust plastic that is all painted with some molded in detail on the dome, no less. And here's the bottom again, that robust plastic. You can see inside just how the 5 tentacles are connected, and of course you can see the hole at the bottom. You see my hand behind it, but that's how the light beam will attach. Obviously with the 5 peg holes, the 5 pegs that are on the dome part of this are what holds the 2 pieces of the body together. So now we have a Quintesson body, but we don't have any faces. You'll notice that there are rectangular, I guess we'll call them pegs. And if we take a face, you'll see that these are painted gloriously. They feel like they're really hard, dense plastic, like the little pieces on the side of his head, the little chin whisker that I'm holding on to, none of that moves. If it's not a dense rubbery plastic, then it's a hard plastic with a lot of paint on it that makes it feel rubbery. I mentioned a rectangular peg. Well, on the back of each of these heads, we have a rectangular space. And I bet you can guess that that space goes over the peg. So it will look like that. And eventually we're going to get all the faces on and it will look like this. And each of these faces, as designed by Floro Deary for, I think, the film in 1986, they're intended to embody one of, I guess, basically 5 emotions, though they've kind of been given names since then. We're not going to start with this one because it's the most obvious one. We'll come back to this one. We're going to start with this one, the angry face, more commonly known as rage or wrath. And then we have the grimacing face, more commonly known as either bitterness or wisdom. An odd dichotomy there to that one. Then we have the smiling face, also known as laughter or, get this, war. Probably because the Quintessons are making a bunch of profit by selling arms to both sides. Next up we have the suspicious face, more commonly known as doubt or judgment. And lastly we have what's perhaps the best known of all of these, the one that retains the same name across comics and cartoons, the one that delivers the guilty or innocent verdict during the, let's call them what they are, mock trials of the Quintessons. This is the one that resembles a skull in the Grim Reaper, the ever-lovable face of death. And of course there are 2 ways to orient the faces. This one over here, the box says is the movie accurate one, while this one over here, the box says is the show accurate one. I think it's the other way around. But there's still a logic to how they're placed. The face of death is where we're going to start. It's common on both of them. And then this one next has the face of wrath, and the movie one has the grimacing face, but then the show one has the grimacing face and the movie one has the wrath. So they just switched positions. Similarly, the smiling face and the suspicious face are respectively up next, And then the smiling face becomes the suspicious face, and you guessed it, the suspicious face becomes the smiling face. And in the end, we come right back around to the face of death. Now, a couple of things to mention before we go forward here. We have several types of Quintessons. As noted, these with the 5 faces are known as the judges, and they're perhaps the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a Quintesson. They're definitely the most popular and well known. There's also the bailiffs, who kind of have a Quintesson face and a humanoid body. There's the executioners, who are very much the same thing. The prosecutors are fairly well known, as are the scientists. And then you have some like security officers and 3-face scientists also sort of, in the mix along the way. But this is kind of your quintessential idea of a Quintesson, and believe it or not, some of these actually have names. For example, there's Bryn, who I believe appeared in the comics, maybe? There's Deliberata, who was on the show, who has this type of a facial scheme. All he did basically was escort like a guard detail that was guarding Ultra Magnus, Cup, and Spike. There's Derodomatatus, the Supreme Imperial Magistrate, and his facial scheme is again similar to this, except I think it might be reversed. Like, I think the angry face is actually on the other side. There's Herodias, the well-known Clementia, who has this scheme for his faces. Why do I say well-known? Because he is the specific Quintesson that restored Optimus Prime to life. There's the evil of the evil, being Pentius. If we go to the Marvel UK comics next, then a couple of things worth noting were introduced there. The very first is the fact that Quintessons could be different sizes, big or small. And since these guys are small, about Legends class size, they would probably best match a character like Sevax. But then we had at least one Quintesson that was quite large, and that would be Cledgy, the royal ruler of the Quintessons, who lives in the royal palace. And his facial orientation, I guess, is like this. So I tend to leave this one with the show accurate face configuration, and I do the other two with the film accurate configuration, and I kind of call this guy my version of Cledgy and make him the ruler of the Quintessons. Why not? Now, isn't that an attractive trio? Faces only a mother could love. And here we have him compared to a couple of the Titans Return Legends class Nas. These are my custom painted ones. One in robot mode, one in shark mode. I looked at Na way back in episode 265. I even sort of mentioned him in an update to some customs I was doing at the time in episode 271. But you can see he is about the same size as a typical Legends class figure. That might be a problem for some people. They might not want their Quintessons that small. I haven't given a score for anything yet, but we're getting to it. Here he is next to my custom Titans Return Cup, and I looked at him way back in episode 250. Then I looked at an update to him in episode 262. And then I kind of looked at another bit of an update to him in episode 271. And finally, I kind of looked at these custom arms that are on him. They came from Knotted on Shapeways, and I kind of discussed how you can dye those plastics, dye arms in episode 301. I still put some custom paint apps on after I dyed them. But you can see, this Quintesson is definitely smaller than a deluxe. And here he is next to Leader Class Ultra Magnus, who I looked at a long time ago in episode 77, but more recently, I looked at him with the KO of the PC-17 add-on kit in episode 540. So you can see, compared to a Leader Class figure, this guy's tiny. But since Quintessons are known as being extremely weak and reliant for their defenses upon the Alicons and, more importantly, those Sharkticons again, perhaps being small is alright. Maybe that's acceptable because everything else is pretty fantastic about this guy. In terms of paint apps, I'm going to say it's a 10. I mean, each face is beautifully painted. The whole body is painted. There's yellow detailing down near the base of the body. The entire light beam, I guess. While there's no actual light in it, it's all translucent pink plastic. It's all basically one big piece of light piping, and it looks glorious. Everything, like, you know, looks good and feels good on this guy. Maybe the green that's used on the face of Death could have been a little bit of a different shade. Maybe instead of having blue on the eyes there, we could have had black. I don't know. But I feel like that's a very minor gripe. So minor that it's hardly really worth mentioning. I think it looks so good and embodies the character of a Quintesson so very well. What about transformation? Well, I said that we use the rectangular slot on the back and put it over the rectangular pegs on the main body. But that being said, it's very easy as well. While they're toleranced really well on all 3 copies I have, by the way, they're not over tolerance. Like, it's easy to get them on. Easy to get them off. They're not going to fall off. They will stay on just fine. But if you wanted to change the orientation of the faces, in other words, if you wanted to transform the position of the faces, you can do that. So while the Quintessons don't really transform at all, the fact that you could change the faces so easily, I guess we'll call that transformation, and I guess we'll call it a 10. And then finally that brings us to articulation. Now the light beam is the light beam. It's not really going to move much. It is what it is. I suppose you could rotate the entire body kind of on the light beam if you wanted to show the face rotation, but why don't you just turn the whole figure? You know, it does it fine. He stands up fine. And then we have the 5 tentacles. And the 5 tentacles are many filaments of wire all twisted together. It's not one piece of wire. I note that because if over time a filament or 2 cracks, I don't think that that's going to ruin the tentacle because there's so many filaments that are twisted together. Furthermore, all of these filaments are within a plastic sheathing, so I think that they'll last a while. I mean, don't abuse the tentacles. I mean, we're talking about relatively thin wires, but I think that they'll last just fine over time. And all 5 of them, because there's no actual joint in its wire, you can move these 5 however you want to move them, and they move all just fine and fantastic. If you wrap them around accessories like little blasters, they can even hold those just fine. Articulation, for what you'd want from a Quintesson, 10. This guy's a 10 across the board. Caveat time, the big drawback, the only real drawback to this guy is if you have a problem with the small size. See, I make do with the small size because they might gang up on Cup or on Ultra Magnus. I mean, they can still wreak some havoc, you know? Big or small, I think these guys are pretty menacing anyway. That being said, I see the argument for having the Unique Toys one because that's a great offering too. It is bigger, but like I said before, it's a lot more expensive, more challenging to find. And the tentacles on that one just tend to hang down. I don't think there's any wire in it. I think they just hang there. On this guy, you can actually pose them and, you know, do some other things with them. I prefer these guys despite the small size. But, like I said, I think that that's just a personal preference thing. And you have to decide what it is that works for you. Objectively speaking, taking the size thing out of it, these guys as Quintessons and as toys are pretty fantastic. So looks-wise, these guys are pretty great. I mean, they definitely fit the bill. The little light-piped post that they ride upon looks glorious, especially if it catches the light right. The 5 faces are sculpted mostly nicely. The paint is pretty great. It's certainly accurate when you really look up close at it. Not so much when you look at it with the naked eye, but certainly when you look up close at it, you can see like there's certain overspray and whatnot, but you know, it is what it is. They're molded nice. The plastic that this is made out of and that the faces are made out of is really good. They hold together well. I love that we have many filaments twisted around each other to make a nice wire for each tentacle, giving him a ton of posability, you know, for what a Quintesson would have. Technically, yes, he doesn't transform, but you can change the orientation of the faces, and I suppose, in a way, that's at least parts forming. I like this. And it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. It was pretty reasonable, slightly more than what I would pay for a Legends class figure. And I can live with that for the size class that this guy is. Plus, you can kind of do some nice displays with them. Anyway, I'm a big fan of these guys, and if you have the opportunity to pick them up, I highly advise it if you'd like to add some Quintessons to your collection like I felt like I wanted to with mine. Perhaps it's time to do another, Cybertron Tonight with Springer, and maybe have this guy be a guest? I don't know. We'll see. It's summertime, man. Anything can happen. I'm going to say thanks for giving me some of your very valuable time. You know how appreciated it is. Again, if you're in a position to donate and help the channel to grow, I have added a link down in the description. And as always, I very much look forward to the next time that you and I get together to have another visit right here inside the videos.